So alongside the this kind of growing tissues in addition and doing experiments on them, what other areas of research are undertaken? I mean, for example, do we look at genes, nervous systems, blood types, muscle formations? What areas are there?
Yeah, that's a big question. You know, it's there's not really any area that isn't being looked at really. I mean, one very strong area that we've been kind of pivotal in providing funding for is genetics, looking at the genes that are associated with MND. We funded around about 10% of this project called Project Mine, which was a European collaboration to sequence 22,500 genomes, 17,500 from people with motor neuron disease versus controls, and that's set up a huge amount of discovery, because now that data is all available and it's being constantly mined by lots of people at the moment, and it will do in the future, to look at associations and causes and which genes protect against MND, which genes cause MND, and also on the back of those discoveries, that's allowed lots and lots of other research to go on. For example, knowledge of new genes and genetic causes. There's a gene called UNC13A, which is now being a part of a clinical trial that's going to start as well on the back of that. So the genetic basis of MND is a really strong area that's been looked at in great detail. Again, all of that is really accelerated because of the technology. You know, when the Human Genome Project was begun, the first human genome was sequenced in 2000. That cost about $1 billion and took about 10 years to do. And now you can sequence a whole human genome in under 24 hours for about £1,000. It's just incredible, and the computing power to analyze all of that data is there now, and is accelerating. In fact, the computers are not keeping up with the amount of data that's being generated from the sequencing. So that's one side of things. And then I'd also say, I touched on earlier about that motor neuron disease isn't just about motor neurons anymore. There are these cells, microglia and astrocytes, lots of work going on to be able to see those cells and what they do and what happens if those cells contain the genetic changes as well as the motor neurons do, because every cell in your body contains really the same DNA, so it has those same genetic changes. So how are those cells affected? And there's lots of work going on to understand that biology, but also to look at how medicines can be repurposed to allow those cells to be protective. So, for example, one type of cell is called a microglia, and they live inside us in a fairly calm state, but they can become aggravated and activated and try to destroy any invaders into the nervous system. So there's work going on to understand what that process is, because when it goes wrong, it's possible that the microglia are actually attacking our own nerves, motor neurons, or our own motor neurons are signaling to the microglia to remove them. So there's a trial called Miracals that we funded as well, which is repurposing a drug called interleukin-2, which has an effect on another cell type called a Treg. Probably getting a bit into depth here, but the interleukin-2 drug, which is originally a cancer drug but is repurposed for this MND trial, this maintains and increases the number of Treg cells, which in turn calm down these microglia and make sure they stay in this calm state. So that's again another area that's been looked at, which is these other cell types which have a really big influence on the motor neurons, which previously they were thought to not play a role. They were just structural down the microscope. Oh yeah, they're just round, making sure everything stays together. But we now know they play a really active role in maintaining the motor neurons. And then probably thirdly, I'd say looking at understanding the genetic discoveries that have been found and how they influence the motor neurons, and there are now various trials of ways to turn down these genes which we may think are toxic to motor neurons, and looking for these overriding genes as well that will be beneficial to everyone with MND if we can turn those levels up or down and work out what they're doing. So there's a lot of areas also in terms of care as well, looking for people people's welfare and quality of life. That's making sure that those stories are not just anecdotal and there's a scientific basis behind those ways that people are cared for with MND.
But the disease differs so much from person to person, and does that make the research much harder than other conditions, or is it comparable?
Yeah, that's the fact that there are differences in the way that the disease progresses and manifests between people, is probably one of the important questions that needs to be addressed. And there are many groups working together and working on each different, I guess, genetic basis or different type of MND and trying to understand those differences in progression. So comparing that, I would say it's probably maybe a comparison that might have been cancer 20 years ago or 30 years ago, where it may have been thought to be one disease, cells growing out of control, whereas now you wouldn't think twice about the fact that prostate cancer might be very different from other types of cancer, and it's treated in a different way, and there are, I guess, even different charities and different researchers specializing in those areas. So that may be something that will come in the past, but I don't think we're quite at that point where the disease is so stratified enough to be separate. I think you can look at the causes and the way the disease happens as a whole at this point. Does that make it more difficult? I guess in terms of gathering the number of people you would need if things were all stratified might be a slight difficulty in terms of trials, but then there is great movement to do these international trials all throughout Europe and globally as well, so you could get those numbers of people together. So I'm not sure I've quite answered that question, as it were, but I think
that makes a lot of sense. Absolutely. I think what I'm hearing a lot is that we're not sure yet, but we're getting there. I think that's really reassuring to know that the work's happening and the results are actually taking us along the journey. To where we go.
I would add that each of the groups around the country that are doing projects are working on specific types of biological change that causes motor neuron disease, and each of those changes would be specific to a subset of people. So we're kind of all working together and collaboratively on all forms of MND. Actually, there's a great need to find potential therapies for sporadic MND or not disease which we don't think has a genetic cause, but by looking at the causes of MND that are based on genes that we know, we're understanding the pathways that are affected and finding new therapies to test that are based on those pathways, and those pathways are the same pathways that are affected in the non-genetic forms of MND. So it's all very overlapping and relevant.
And does MND research draw on wins from in other conditions? You've kind of mentioned one with spinal muscular dystrophy in children there, or does it kind of have to stay in its own lane?
Yeah, far from it. So certainly researchers are scanning far and wide all the literature and in communication with people from other neurodegenerative conditions. So it's certainly not the case that people are only blinkered looking at MND. They're taking in all of the findings and developments from all research far and wide, which is really important thing to do. And conversely, people are also looking at MND because we're pioneering ahead with research. We had that injection of money some time ago for the Ice Bucket Challenge, and that led to quite a lot of people getting into MND research because the funding was there to build a bit of a foundation. And so some of the discoveries from MND people are looking at. In other neurodegenerative diseases, it's neurons that are dying in different parts of the body. So is it a similar mechanism, or what is the process that we can use to control that? So yeah, certainly looking far and wide in many different areas.
There's quite a lot of hope in your answers in terms of the fact that there could be things along the horizon to help people with the condition. In terms of the trajectory to date of those changes, what does that look like in terms of the rate that those discoveries are happening at, and what do you expect to happen in the future?
Well, it's definitely the case that the rate of discovery is accelerating. If you look at the number of publications that are coming out every year or every month, that number's increasing greatly, and each one of those is a new discovery or a new piece of understanding about the disease. So that's for sure. There's much more interest from companies now in getting involved in motor neuron disease clinical trials, and there are a lot more clinical trials, active clinical trials going on, and clinical trials planned than there've ever been before. So I'm pretty optimistic and hopeful that something on the horizon is going to work. You know, there have been many disappointments on the way with things, but every one of those is another learning that we add into the mix, you know, and it's just a case of keep pushing to find the one that works and do the science in the best collaborative way we can.
So in your opinion, what would be the particular area which is showing the most signs of promise in terms of research towards a cure?
I think there's quite a few areas actually. There isn't one in particular. There's several that really kind of excite me or are showing promise, but we're really pushing the door on many fronts. So I know I keep saying about genetics, but really some of the progress that's been made in these gene technologies to try to turn down the products of these genes, which we know are associated with causing MND, are looking very promising. And as I said, those therapies may only affect a certain subset of people with a particular genetic change, but there's now research going on to look at pathways further up or genes further up, which may help everybody with motor neuron disease or a much larger proportion of people with motor neuron disease. So that's a real, again, another sort of science fiction turned reality thing that you know we thought never would work, but there are cases. Other things, spinal muscular atrophy in small children has been treated with a genetic therapy, which is really promising and absolutely incredible. So there is real hope out there that those technologies can be applied to motor neuron disease, and we await to see the results. But you know, we're hearing potentially good things about that. And then the other side, I would say, would be these almost sort of things you might think would be coming from left field. So there's a trial called a compound called Triumec, which is an antiviral medication, which sounds a bit unusual, but maybe the effective treatments or slowing down disease is going to come from something that's slightly left field that you would never consider would be part of motor neuron disease, but it's based on really good evidence that's starting to build up. And then again, I'd say finally those other cells which aren't motor neurons. So we've looked at motor neurons for a long time, and these other cells we're only really now beginning to understand how they affect the motor neuron. So the answer may come from those areas as well. So there's a huge number of different projects and number of approaches that are being looked at to sort of unlock the mystery and find the answers to MND. So yeah, I'm kind of hopeful that one or many of them will combine together to get effective treatments.
Following up from that, there's been a number of fairly high-profile people who've been diagnosed with a condition in recent years. I'm thinking about, you know, Doddie Weir, Stephen Darby, and Rob Burrow, who we see on BBC Breakfast quite frequently and have done an awful lot to raise awareness. Has that kind of celebrity traction helped move MND up the political priority list, if you like? And what else does it take to get that sort of political traction to effect change in the right direction?
Yeah, those high-profile people and we work closely with them, are really important in that raising awareness piece, you know. And it's as you know, we touched on at the beginning before we started this recording, you know, raising that awareness and people saying, you know, what is MND? Or somebody says, oh, my husband has MND, and somebody says, oh, you know, what is that? You know, now because of those high profile cases, then, you know, a lot more people understand what MND is and how important it is to find the answers. You know, I said at the start that it affects anybody and it doesn't discriminate. You can be going about your normal life and have plans for retirement and all of that kind of thing when you're affected by MND, and it really does sort of destroy families and has that really long lasting effect. And so their cases have meant that people have been able to, I mean, almost sort of come out of the shadows into the open to talk about MND and talk about why it needs to be funded and what it actually means. So they've done a huge amount of work to raise awareness of MND, and again, in collaboration with ourselves and the BBC, for example, you know, to get MND on BBC Breakfast, and for the sort of bravery and honesty of Rob Burrow and Doddie Weir and Stephen Darby to be talking about their journey so publicly is really, really important. And it, you know, I can understand how hard that would be to do, but it's so vitally important to get that front and center, I think. And it has made a huge difference in terms of Kevin Sinfield doing his 7-in-7 marathons, for Rob Burrow, and the ripple effect of that in terms of people also taking up the challenge at home, you know, providing that funding. That momentum is really impressive and noticeable and desperately needed. And obviously then that is seen by people in government, you know, and they then understand that there is a public need for something to be done with MND. So, you know, we hope, and we lobby government as well, and we've just been going through this process of trying to get this £50 million for MND research with the government, which is still ongoing. You know, they haven't sort of written a check or anything at the moment, but that's, you know, we would never be able to do that, and it's brought the charities and those guys together with us to do lobbying of government as well. So yeah, really, really important, and we're really grateful for it.
I couldn't agree more about seeing them share their journeys on such a big platform, and the impact it has on me personally to see those high profile figures and their families going through what Emma and I and my family go through. It's really powerful stuff. I think hopefully it'll make a change for the disease. Now, there was a lot of publicity a little while ago about the MND Smart project being run out of Edinburgh. Could you just give us an update on the current status of that, please?
Yes, so that had some delays because of COVID. Obviously, people were being protected as best as possible, and it has sort of reactivated, and our care centres around the country as well are all getting involved as sites for that trial. So it is actively recruiting in some areas, but not others, and others are trying to get online to allow that recruitment process to happen. You know, it's one of those things that got quite a lot of publicity when it was announced, and has been in some ways held back quite a bit by the COVID situation. But there are other trials as well which are going to be starting up as well through the Trials network. So collaborative trials throughout Europe, which we're behind as well, and there'll be more news coming out about that in the near future.
Fantastic. Yeah, I think that's important to say, actually, is that one got a whole heap of publicity, which is obviously fantastic. But that's not the be all and end all in terms of the trials that are going on. There are things all the time. It's just that one was particularly interesting from a repurposing of repurposing of existing medications point of view, that's what made that quite groundbreaking and unique, as far as I'm aware.
Yeah, that's what I mean. It is 2 repurposed compounds, and there have been other trials, and I mean the lithium trial, for example, which is going to be starting to be the Trials network at some point. Again, is a repurposing of a drug. I mean, it's a faster and cheaper way to get things approved and into a medicine. And the SMART trial is what's known as a platform trial, where multiple drugs are tested at the same time. So there is the Healy Center platform trial in the US, and as I say, through Trials, the Magnet platform trial, which is going to be starting up as well. So it's a kind of it's a way of doing trials that's based on proven concepts through cancer research as well. So it's really good to see that's happening now in motor neuron disease research, and it avoids that issue of where the infrastructure has to be built up individually for each trial and then taken down and started again, which is an expensive and less efficient way to do things, but still an important way to do trials as well, I must say.
Dr. Nick Cole, thank you ever so much for your time, your intellect, your insight today. It's been absolutely fascinating for me personally, and I hope for everyone watching to listen to you and to learn about what's been happening in MND research. I have one final question for you, which is what motivates you in your stand against MND?
I think really just the fact that it seems to be so unfair that, I've met many people in my working life with motor neuron disease, and it just seems that we should understand it and we should know how to treat it. So I have no trouble getting out of bed in the morning to do my job, because I know that there is an answer out there, and I know that some great people are doing really good work to find it, but also how it affects people and affects families in such a way that it should definitely be fun. We should have more funding and we should have more understanding of it, and I really do feel positive that the work that everybody's doing is really pushing us in the right direction, and the answers are going to come.
Thank you. Thanks ever so much for your time and for all the work that you do. I mean, I'm one member of a community that really, really does appreciate it. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you. Thanks for chatting to me. It's an absolute pleasure.